Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. This week I'm taking a look at two interviews which really do sum up the mood of the moment. Dame Helena Morrissey is the City Fund manager on a mission to even the playing field for women in business, while Jimmy Wales is the digital pioneer and founder of Wikipedia, who has taken aim at fake news and the health of the internet. First, let's hear from Helena as she explained her vision for the future.
You know, I've always been kind of driven to do things that I feel passionate about. I mean, it's an overworked expression, passion, but obviously there are things that I've seen, particularly around women in business, currently trying to encourage investors, you know, more people to invest. There are things that need sorting out, and it's just intrinsic thing about me that I like doing that.
Is it a good time to be a woman in business?
Well, I believe it's a good time to be a girl, full stop. I think in my own career, and I've just celebrated 30 years in the city.
Congratulations.
And, well, thank you. I think there is. I think that is in order.
Is it better over those 30 years?
Well, absolutely. And I think we spend a lot of time sort of wringing our hands about all the things that haven't been fixed. And of course, you do want to continue working on those. But it has improved dramatically. In my first decade, you know, it was quite a hostile environment in the city, a lot of sexism, a lot of overt discrimination. Then we moved through a phase when I think you describe it as women being tolerated. And then post the financial crisis, a real desire for diversity.
And you set up the 30% Club with the specific objective of 30% of women on FTSE 100 boards. I mean, is that a case yet of mission accomplished, or how far is there still
Well, just
to travel?
about, but it's like 27%. But to be honest, it became quite quickly, it moved beyond, you know, just the idea of having a few more women on a few more boards. I mean, that's a start, not really enough for changing culture in all businesses and so forth. So it quickly moved on to much more about schoolroom to boardroom, and still with a focus on women. And actually, these days I run something called the Diversity Project, which is in the investment industry, where we have very few women, very few ethnic minority people, very few openly gay people, trying to improve diversity in all its dimensions. But the women on boards thing, I think that's pretty much done.
I mean, you made the point before about, you know, women need to be more than just the honorary man on the board. I mean, do you feel that actually women are being sort of understood for the contribution they can now make in business?
Well, it's unfinished business, I got to say. I think that it started out people thinking, actually, you know, maybe we certainly learned through the financial crisis that having a lot of people cut from the similar cloth was probably not the optimal team. You know, people said, actually, you know, look at the Royal Bank of Scotland board at the time of the ill-fated ABN AMRO acquisition. 18 members, 17 were men. Many of them had grown up in the same street in Edinburgh. I mean, I exaggerate for effect, but, you know, very tight clique. And so there was this appetite for change.
Could that have been averted, do you think, if there had been a more representative board?
Well, of course, we can never live life going back over what might have happened. But I do think one of the impetuses behind what happened around the 30% Club, where people thought, actually, we need to avert this happening again. And actually, one way is to have more diversity of thought. Now, the question is, has having more women on boards achieved that? And I must admit, I feel that it's created the appearance of change, but we have still got a long way to go before we have real challenge, real sort of a shake-up of what it takes to oversee companies.
I mean, the debate, though, today is of something of an altogether different proportion than just sort of everyday sexism. I mean, when you read about Harvey Weinstein, when you read about Westminster, when you read about all of these sort of big stories of sexual harassment, do you think the city is the next stop for this in terms of whistleblowing and in terms of actually uncovering perhaps the dark heart of what's going on?
Well, I do think that one thing the Me Too conversation on social media has shown is that this is obviously much more than one man or one industry or one nation. It's a global phenomenon, unfortunately. I don't think it's any surprise, you know, it's a very male-dominated environment, the city still, unfortunately, better than it was, I hasten to add, but it's still very male-dominated, and there's a lot of power and a lot of, you know, money talks, and I think it is one of those things that's intrinsically, you know, problematic. It's an environment where also people have probably been nervous about speaking up.
Are you aware of cases?
Well, I have been. I do think, from talking to friends, you know, there are other women in the city who I talk to. Most people, don't think just because we've got older and so forth. I think it's just most people feel that it's much less prevalent, that there's much more awareness, even if it's just because of the law, that this is a bad idea. Most companies have a lot of processes and policies in place. Obviously, what you don't know what you don't know, and that's, you know, I suppose what's happening on, and perhaps you can say that this is is why it's a good time to be a girl or somebody different and so forth, because now you can make your voice heard, and we have been shown how things can change.
But I suppose the thing about the Me Too hashtag is that it's revealing how prevalent the issue of sexual harassment is for women in society, for successful women in the city. I mean, for example, have you experienced anything in this area?
I have, but a long time ago, hasten to add. But and I think you know, I just didn't know quite how to respond to it at the time, and I think my reaction was probably very similar to lots of other people's. I think now there is a culture where people are encouraged to speak up, if not, you know, just for their own sakes, but for the sake of everybody else. And I think that's what the Me Too conversation is risky in some ways because it can make everybody seem a predator, you know? I mean, that's not the case either. One great thing about the 30% Club has been men and women working together. And I know so many brilliant men who are just, you know, for their daughters, for their wives, you know, just think that everything that we've been doing is important. So I don't want to, I think it's important to distinguish.
I appreciate it's a sensitive subject,
Yeah.
but without names, can you indicate what happened in terms of...
Well, just like when people go for a drink after work, there was a sort of Friday evening drink, and I say this is a long time ago. I'm not going to name any names, but you know, people kind of touched me up, and you know, I just kind of moved away and was quite sort of like, you know, horrified. It was a male colleague, and you know, it happened a couple of times, and I just then didn't know how to sort of, you know, look at him in the eye on the Monday morning, really. But I didn't tell anybody.
Do you get a sense that the city is worse than business in general, or is this a across-the-board challenge, do you think?
I think it's across the board. I think, as I say, industries that are male-dominated or that have a certain, I don't want to imply that just because it's men that these things happen, but there's a kind of cultural issue that we have been fighting against or trying to change ever since the financial crisis in particular. And as I said earlier, I think it's unfinished business. I do gather from, you know, talking to people that there are plenty of examples in lots of other industries as well, but where you have a real imbalance. I mean, in fund management, only 10% of fund managers are women.
Now,
So.
I read one report that described you as the delicate poise of a swan-like ballerina. I mean, how much is that? I mean, I was thinking,
really talking about me?
I was just thinking, would they ever describe Alan Sugar or somebody else in that kind of way? Do you sort of feel that, you know, sort of successful women business leaders are still objectified and almost have to have different rules to sort of live by than successful men?
Well, I mean, we all tend to generalise, and so there is a tendency. I mean, I often get described as, you know, mother of nine, sort of, you know, before the rest of me. Yeah. I suppose I have learned that actually our difference, the ultimate thing with all the diversity work is that our difference is valued, and not delicate poise of whatever it was you said, which I don't really recognise in myself, but actually there's a recognition. That was a sort of work of fiction, but there's a sort of sense that actually, you know, it does take more than just, you know, we live in a homogenous society, lots of different ideas, lots of creative, you know, thinking comes about when you've got different people. It's part of one's identity, and I think difference is, I mean, at one stage when I was a fund manager in the city, I found myself in this, you know, I don't want to exaggerate how significant this was, but this small group of fund managers who were getting the prizes and, you know, on the panels and so forth. And they weren't just all men, they were all men named Paul. You know, so the fact that I would be described as a bit differently, and the fact that I won sometimes was, I hope, not just because I was easily identified, or more easily identified. But, you know, we have to accept, I accept a long time ago, that actually the whole Helena, whatever, is who I am. Hopefully it also encourages other women who think you don't have to be formidable or tough, you can actually, you know, be feminine. And I don't mind that at all. I mean, I love clothes, I love, you know, chatting to my daughters, that's
fine,
all, I think that's fine. I don't think that makes me frivolous, I don't think that makes me any less valuable in the workplace.
Now, you've described Theresa May as a like-minded doer. Are you still a fan post-party conference and all the rest?
Well, I think actually I did go to a dinner that Friday after the conference. It was
did the signs stay
the
up?
Local, well, she had better luck, and I thought it was really good. She turned up to celebrate my local MP outside London is John Redwood, and she turned up to celebrate his 30 years as a Conservative MP. And you know, she was as gracious as always. Walks around the table. It doesn't come across and when she gives media interviews. And we had a really nice chat. I thought it was incredible that she, at the end of as she put it, a quiet week, when she stood up and spoke, that she, you know, made the effort to do that.
Is she good news for women as Prime Minister?
Well, for me, I have seen her before she became Prime Minister when she was in the Home Office, and she, for example, introduced me to one of her constituents who she thought could help on the 30% Club's mentoring scheme. And this woman, Liz Dimmock, who is a sportswoman and set up this mentoring effort, has been hugely helpful to me. I think we've helped her. That's what I meant by she's a doer. She took the time and trouble to write to me to say, you must meet Liz. She followed up. Did you manage to meet her? And I admire people who get on with it. I don't think she has, it's been a very difficult time, and I'm sure it's not gone the way she would have liked it to.
So her reputation as a like-minded doer seems to be intact, certainly from your point of view, Helen. The inspirational Helena Morrissey. When we come back, we'll move from the representation of women on boards to the representation of truth on the internet. Because next up is Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales. We'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. Now, Jimmy Wales is part of a group of internet pioneers who have revolutionised how we interact with information. His mission is simply this: to provide access to the truth. And I asked Jimmy to tell us why.
I do think we've been through a bit of a bad period. I think that it will swing back. It must swing back, but it's going to take a while. And it's not just a blip about elections that I disagreed with the outcome, but really I'm concerned about the decline of quality journalism, of quality media, particularly at the local level. It's been really devastating.
So, mad and bad is more than just, we're presuming, Donald Trump?
Exactly.
Right, I mean, and you said that you were prepared to give Donald Trump 100 days, but you in fact gave him 48 hours. And it was this issue of alternative facts that Kellyanne Conway raised. I mean, is this what's driving you now, this sort of search for the truth?
Yeah, for me this is incredibly important. I mean, Wikipedia has always been based on the idea that we should present the highest quality information that we can. We should work really hard to get it right. We should use quality sourcing and so on. Of course, there's mistakes and this and that happens. It's a noisy, open place, but that's the fundamental philosophy of Wikipedia. But that gets harder and harder to do if we are seeing politicians who have very little concern for actual facts, and a public that, while they still have a deep concern for the facts, are being, systematically misled and confused by a lot of nonsense.
Is it different now? Has something changed, or has it always ever been thus?
Well, I think it's very easy to have a rosy view of the past, so we should be careful about that. Obviously, we've always had with us, yellow journalism, propaganda newspapers, and things like that. But I think what has shifted in recent years is the incredible prevalence of very low quality media that gets shared over and over and over on social media, that is not just biased. I mean, we've always had biased newspapers, of course, but systematically undermining the very idea of the possibility of understanding the world.
Do you feel, I mean, you're one of the kind of pioneers of the internet age, and whatever you read about those pioneers, it's that the internet heralded the idea of a more truthful, open, sort of more democratic opportunity, and yet now we see this kind of blurring of opinion with fact. I mean, just what kind of a mess? Is it a mess that are we in right now?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing is the original fundamental optimism of the internet is something that I still share. The idea that in authoritarian societies, it's not possible for bad governments to control the flow of information in the old-fashioned, really rigid way. But what we are seeing is that they have become a lot more sophisticated in the current environment. It's kind of an arms race kind of thing, at putting out narratives and ideas through social media, through paid advertising. So we should be aware of government at the moment. We should be very, very wary. I think we will get through it. People are reacting against it. I mean, we see, for me, one of the most optimistic things we are seeing is the number of subscribers to the New York Times, for example, has gone from, the digital subscribers have gone from 1 million to, I think, just over 3 million now in just the past couple of years. That's a huge shift, which means that outlets like the New York Times, if they're able to get money from the readers, It means they don't have to chase clickbait headlines. They don't have to go for the cheapest possible content.
Well, let's just stick with the clickbait headlines, because I mean, you've taken aim at corporations as being a part of the problem, driving this sort of lowest common denominator style of content rather than the highest common denominator. What's your message to business right now in terms of what it needs to do to play a part in cleaning up the internet?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that depends on the particular actor. I'm not sure I've taken aim at corporations in the broadest sense, but I would say that
advertising as incredibly destructive, I think.
Yeah, what I say is the advertising-only business model has been incredibly destructive, and that's really hard to avoid. So, just as an example, one of the most important innovations, which most consumers don't really know that much about, although they've noticed it a little bit, is what we call programmatic advertising. And so this is the advertising that follows you around all over the web, and they know what you're interested in, and they show you ads for that. And in some ways, obviously, that's a really good thing. I'm getting advertisements for things I care about, not just nonsense. But the downside is it means that every website on the internet is competing head-to-head with every other, and in that you get a race to the bottom. The silliest clickbaity headline gets the same ad money as a high-quality newspaper. The Wall Street Journal is competing directly with what this child star looks like today, and that's a problem.
But if it's a choice, I mean, Facebook allows you to filter the sort of news that you want to receive. I mean, is that a good or a bad thing?
No, I think it is a good thing. I mean, choice is a good thing. People do have the right to express themselves and so forth. But I think we need a little bit more awareness that the ways that we've been interacting with each other and with social media hasn't always matched up with what we truly desire. I mean, one of the things that I talk about is, for human beings, we have our sort of immediate whim desires, and then we have our long-term, more reflective, thoughtful desires. And the social media landscape has really targeted and allowed us to really sort of flourish on I'm bored, I'm clicking on my phone, I just click on whatever looks interesting, which is always going to be the clickbait headline and so forth. Then I think everybody's experienced this. 15 minutes later, you're like, I could have read an interesting essay about Brexit or something.
But what's the cumulative effect when I think it's 2.2 billion users of Facebook every month, in terms of their ability to create their own echo chambers, views that reinforce their own opinions?
Well, yeah,
what's the cost to us as people?
I mean, I think it's a real problem, and I do think, I used to be very skeptical of the filter bubble kind of concept. So when people first started talking about it, it was really in the era when all these independent blogs were out there. And I said, well, yeah, of course, people may tend to read blogs they agree with, but those blogs are always linking to the other side so they can debate with them, and that's what the blogging world is all about. Now, when you look at what your friends share on social media, it's going to tend to be very similar to your views because your friends are the same, sort of social milieu and so on. And that's problematic, and I think most people don't really want that. You don't want to just hear the echo chamber. You want to hear what people you aren't like, what are they thinking, what are they hearing, because otherwise you can't really make solid decisions.
Okay, let's move to Wikipedia, because, I mean, it's one of those rare sort of organisations, a bit like Google. You've got verb status, I Wikipedia it. I mean, just in terms of actually what you've created there, take us right back. Tell us about the idea.
Yeah.
How did you start it?
Well, the original vision for Wikipedia is for all of us to imagine a world in which every single person on the planet is given free access to the sum of all human knowledge in their own language. And this has really been our core mission from day one. The idea of Wikipedia came from watching the growth of free software, open source software, and seeing people coming together to collaborate in new ways. And the idea was let's get together and share knowledge, and let's try to make something of real quality and meaningfulness in the world. And of course, that's proven to be very popular.
Was there a moment when you realised we're really onto something here? Because, I mean, if you take us back to the California startup, right, in terms of actually...
Yeah. Well, I had a project beforehand called Newpedia, same vision. Didn't really understand the wiki aspect of things, which is a website anyone can edit. Didn't really understand how to build community. Once we changed the software, we got more work done in 2 weeks than we had in almost 2 years. And I thought, oh, now we're onto something. And then after a few months, you could just see the traffic was doubling every 3-4 months. You could see that the quality of the site was steadily improving, that people were interested in participating, and was there a point where you just felt,
I've now lost control of this entity. It's now a life of its own.
No, not really. I mean, I never had control, so you know.
I mean, it's one of those things.
Maybe on day one, I don't know. But,
you've never been associated with the empire builder in the same way that sort of Eric Schmidt, others have been.
Right, yeah.
There's always been a sense of that Wikipedia has a more perhaps noble goal. Do those founding truths hold true?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's been really important for Wikipedia is from the beginning to have a certain set of core principles around neutrality, around quality, around no personal attacks, try to be nice to each other, try to be collegial, focus on the work, not on just having a random debate, which you can have anywhere on the internet. And those things were with us from the beginning and have stood the test of time.
And does the truth pay? I mean, there's always many stories about just how difficult it is to get Wikipedia to make money. I mean, in terms of the commercial aspects, I mean, we've got a few seconds before the break.
So Wikipedia is a charity, and we depend almost exclusively on the small donors. Financially, we've done very well over the years. We always have to take fundraising seriously, but we're stable. We ask people to give, and they do give, and so that's been working. So we have no need or intention to change the model or anything like that.
Well, that's all we have time for this week, and thanks for joining me for this special episode of the Capital Conversation. And you know what? You got 2 guests for the price of 1. And what amazing stories of campaigners making a difference to the life of our capital city. I'll see you next time.